Hey friends, and welcome back to more Entitled People stories. Let's get into it. Had to cut down trees that were in danger of falling on the house. Neighbors were angry. So this happened to my parents, and I was just a simple witness to it. Behind my parents' house, there were really tall trees, very tall, and there had always been concerns if they would fall on the house. So finally, my parents decided to hire some people to check it out. Turns out, the concerns were very real. From what I had got from my mom's explanation, the placement of the trees and how tall they had grown had made them unstable. Plus, a storm we had a few months prior had only worsened the condition, so they had to be cut down. The thing is, the trees helped to block the view between us and our neighbors on the other side of it, and they were not happy when they saw the trees were being cut down. A man came out screaming at the workers to stop. He yelled that the trees had been there since he was a kid, and it would ruin the view. The workers gave a brief explanation of the information above. He still demanded them to stop. Eventually, his wife came out too and joined in on the yelling. My parents told the workers to not mind them, seeing as the trees were obviously within their property. The man and his wife then threatened to call the cops, and I guess that was where my parents drew the line. My parents yelled that they and their family could be killed if the trees fell, but the man and wife didn't care. They still demanded that everything be stopped. In the end, the trees were cut down, and our neighbors were pissed after. They would periodically throw crap over the fence into my parents' yard, random pieces of garbage, dog toys. Whenever my brother or I were there, we would just throw those things back. At some point, the neighbors finally stopped, but it honestly baffled me that they were willing to risk people's lives to keep their view. She didn't sign up to be a parent. My 21-year-old daughter has been working as a nanny for a family for around 2.5 years. She doesn't live in, but looks after the children, twin 8-year-olds, for around 15 hours a week. More at times, including school holidays and the occasional night. The mom has recently decided that she would join the armed forces, which will involve her going away for basic training for around 16 weeks. During that time, she is only expecting to have access to her phone once per week. She is separated from dad, but he is still very active in their lives when he is not traveling for his work. During the 16 weeks, it will be the children's birthday as well. She has, however, decided that my daughter will need to look after her children for the time that she is away. She can't provide any commitment around time off, and today has advised that she simply can't afford what would be considered only slightly but less than minimum wage. Instead of taking any responsibility for her role as a parent, she just keeps telling my daughter how she should be grateful for this opportunity, which she is handing to her on a silver platter. She is using all types of emotional blackmail to convince her to do it, for about the same as she is paid for 15 hours of work, saying things like, "If I can't do this, I will just have to get a normal job, stay here, and be a housewife and hate my life." As well as statements about how much she is looking forward to getting away from her children, but that it won't be that big a deal for my daughter to look after them for her. My daughter is a very emotional soul who is now trying to come to terms with being told that the mom has to give up on her dream because my daughter expects to be paid a somewhat reasonable wage, to have some non-negotiable weekends that she has pre-planned activities, including being a bridesmaid for a friend, off, and have a few other more than reasonable conditions considered. Let an elected official call the cops on himself. So several years ago, I worked as an unarmed guard for a security company that was contracted to watch over a new construction site for a large wind farm. This area was hilly, rural terrain with lots of wind, perfect for this kind of project, or so I was told by the many contractors on the project. It was also popular with hunters, both local and not. The possibility of bullet holes in equipment being the primary concern, followed by a long distance by theft. The property had an old dirt road running through it that had been previously open to anyone wanting to use it. This part becomes important later. I had been working this site since they broke ground on construction and never had any issues, until a roll of copper wire was stolen. Our company had assumed that anyone trying to do anything on the site would use the heavily improved road through the site. They were proven wrong when that spool went out the back road. The only other access road that met up behind the property was nearly impassable for anything but four-wheel drive trucks, so had been considered unimportant beforehand. Needless to say, we moved to 2 guards minimum overnight, one at the main entrance and one patrolling the site. The other change was that the company who owned the project decided to require every person entering the site to have a badge identifying them. Due to the popularity with hunters, it created some issues due to this road now being the smoothest and quickest way to the backside of the property. The hunters would come and go, but the people who owned cabins behind the property were more regularly seen throughout the year. It was one of these owners that became the biggest problem. He was proud to flaunt the office he had previously held and adamant that he had an easement to drive through this property to get to his. It may be different in other areas, but here, an easement, which is the ability to drive through someone else's property, is given if there is no alternative route available. With there being a road that led out to the public roads from the back of the property we were guarding, this wasn't the case here. The company we were contracted with was actually pretty reasonable with allowing access, no money involved, and just some personal information, identification. For this particular individual, that wasn't good enough. He made a routine of speeding past the guards and refusing to stop, so a gate was installed and kept shut, short of the construction crews starting and ending shifts. One of the other guards let us know that he was trying to get a ticket or get arrested, so he could take the owner to court. My luck would have it that he chose one of my shifts to try to run the gate, this shift being a midday on a Sunday, with the crew having come in for overtime to fix something in one of the nacelles, the large box behind the blades, that had been flagged during testing and couldn't wait for repair. Honestly, not too sure what was going on with that end. With all of that in mind, this gentleman drives up and starts yelling about accessing his property. We have his picture, so I already knew who he was. I pretended to not hear him clearly, giving me enough time to start using the gate in front of him. This is not a fancy electric gate, it's a steel cattle gate that you have to walk open and close. As I start shutting the gate, he starts driving forward, so I stop and stand in front of his truck and let the gate swing back open. He tells me to move out of his way, to which I responded that I know he won't risk running me over, because he knows he would lose what he is trying to gain, free and unrestricted access through the property to his. Seeing that I have the advantage, he decides to try a different approach. He made a comment along the lines of just blocking the road until I let him through, or call the cops. I bluffed a little in telling him about the crew working on the site, and said I wouldn't do anything about it. But since they were on overtime on a weekend, I wouldn't stop them from doing whatever they needed to do to be able to go home, which led to him pushing to get the police involved. I was given explicit instructions not to call the police on him, because all that was wanted was for him to come back during the week to get a pass, which I told him repeatedly to no avail. He decided to keep pushing the police getting called, which I kind of started to find funny the more he talked about it. He went from simply saying I should call them to more in-depth pushing. He asked if we had a phone in the guard shack, which we didn't. He asked if I had a cell phone, which I lied and said I didn't, which was more believable considering they hadn't gotten very popular yet. He then said he did, but didn't want to call 911 since it wasn't an emergency, and asked if we had a phone book. Still not sure why we had one, but it was there. He even tried to get me to call the sheriff on him off of his own phone, which I again refused. Not ready to give up, he took it upon himself to call the sheriff's department on himself. Satisfied that the police were on their way, he moved his vehicle aside and allowed me to shut the gate. It was about 30 minutes before the first deputy arrived, since it was a weekend and a remote part of the county they served. Being the security guard, they approached me first. I told them what had happened, and that neither my company nor the property owner had an issue with him or what he was doing, as he was outside the gate and not blocking anything. The officer shook his head about this guy calling them in himself and walked over to talk to the ex-elected official. It's about this time the crew that was working came down, asked what was going on, and had a quick laugh before heading back home or wherever they were staying. In all, about 5 officers responded to this call, and each one gets a laugh about getting a call like this one. It must have been a slow day for them to have so many show up for this joke call, and then take another half hour to 45 minutes deciding how to handle it. In the end, they gave him his ticket for falsely reporting a crime, or something along those lines, to which I hear him yelling out his window as he drives off that he got his day in court. The officers, who had yet to start leaving, laughed and said, "Yeah, he will get his day in court, but it's not going to be the one he thinks he's getting." I moved out and took everything. It became apparent to me last week that my roommates were trying to drive me out of the house to get one of their boyfriends in on my lease. When I told them I wanted to stay, they started staging incidents and messes around the house so they could yell at me for them. And it all came to a head when they called a meeting with me 2 days ago. One of them had to hold the other back as she screamed at me that she hated me, and I was not welcome in the building. They proceeded to tell me that I contributed nothing to the house and wasted their space, and that they had gotten in with the landlady and convinced her to not renew my lease in June. I told them I'd talk to the landlady, and when they said they were the heads of the house, I laughed and went on with my day. I spoke to the landlady and she acknowledged that they were out of hand. And while she had given them the power to not renew my lease, she also said I could move out whenever and not pay for a single day I wasn't there. So yesterday, when my roommates both left to visit family, they are sisters, I immediately called everyone I knew and vacated the house of everything I owned. I took the curtains, the rugs, all the cat toys, and even the cat tower that I had made with my mom. I took all of their things off my shelves and other furniture and stacked them in the middle of the now nearly empty living room. I snapped pictures of everything, handed the keys to the landlady, and immediately screwed off. They won't be back to the house until tomorrow. I've blocked them on everything, so I won't get any angry messages, but I'm sure their faces will be priceless when they come home to a half-empty house. So much for me not contributing anything to the house. Now I actually don't. They also have to find someone else to take up the lease until their boyfriend can move in when June comes around, or they have to pick up my rent. My sister and brother-in-law want to come on my anniversary holiday. A few things. She's my husband's brother's girlfriend, and I truly dislike this woman. She's a total bitch. From the moment we met, she's made rude, homophobic, and vulgar comments. My husband and I have gone low contact with both her and her brother-in-law. It's mine and my husband's 10-year anniversary in a couple months. My husband and I have decided we're going on a romantic holiday to a Fiji resort for 10 days. We've asked my husband's parents to watch our 9-year-old while we're gone. They of course agreed. This is how brother and sister-in-law found out about our trip. I've been getting calls, texts, and emails from both of them, wanting to make it a quote, couples trip, which we're supposed to pay for as an apology for making everyone hate them.